Did you see him?
Was he not?
We're not afraid of delegation. However, I wouldn't see it cross.
I'll tell you why. When I went to this place, I know we had the money first.
Oh, God. I don't know. Maybe I should listen to
so they did some tests.
Christie's always late for
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is the Town of Nantucket Finance Committee meeting for December 4th. Oh, thank you. December 4th, 2014. Before we start the meeting, as you know, we are all on the camera, so I will ask every member be sure their microphone is on and speak into the mic. I guess there's been some complaints or some criticism of not being able to hear your witty comments and analysis. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce members of the committee. On the television screen to your left, John Tiffany, Clifford Williams, Jim Kelly, David Worth, Craig Sperry, Joe Grouse, and Steve Morey. And Christy Crickham is just walking down the hall. So everybody's here. Okay, so the meeting is called to order. Is there any public comment for today? Right over here. Thank you. Hearing none, there are some minutes in our packet from November 13th. There was one correction that was pointed out to me. I believe I made a comment about Article 90 at the 2014 annual town meeting, and I made a comment that the committee voted negative recommendation was to take no action. So, Terry, can we correct that? And that's on page 5, right after my name. Instead of a negative motion, just put motion to take no action. Can you change that, please? Thank you. Any other comments on the minutes for November 13th? Okay, hearing none, I'll ask for a motion.
So moved. So moved.
Thank you. And a second.
Second.
Discussion on the motion. Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Abstain.
Abstain. Okay. One abstention. All right, thank you. The next item on our agenda is committee reports. There is an audit committee meeting on December 16th in this building, and that's the only committee that I know of. Any of the committee? Christie?
Contract review is just almost wrapped up, meeting with the providers to go over their most current requests. We have one more to meet with, and that's about it.
Okay, great.
Yep.
David?
Sewer committee, we have had, or I've been to one meeting. We have another meeting scheduled on Monday. You're all welcome to attend. The consultants will be here to answer questions that the committee has, and we'll see where we go from there.
Great. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. John?
Yeah, Capital Program Committee, we're pretty well wrapped up, getting ready for our presentation here on the 17th. And I think we've got some work to do, but I think we've got pretty well figured out what we're going to do. We may not have completed the 10-year factor, but we're certainly going to be able to present a recommendation for the 2016 capital, and hopefully we'll have something for the 10-year plan as well. But if we don't, we'll get to you later on that. Okay?
Great, thanks. That's great.
And Matt?
Joe, yes, sir.
At the fire station work group, I've been away a couple of weeks, so I did not make the last couple of meetings, but I noticed in the Board of Selectmen packet that they did make their recommendation to the Board of Selectmen.
They did.
Was it Wednesday? Libby gets to shake your head, but 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Good.
just for the record, they did make a recommendation to construct a new firehouse on this location.
For Fairgrounds, very good. That's good. And do you know, are there any more meetings scheduled that you're aware of?
Not that I have seen in the last couple of weeks, so.
All right, very good. All right, is that it for committee reports? Great. We'll move on, and it was requested, I'm going to switch one article around. There's item number 6, reserve fund transfer from the Plus Department. We're going to go ahead and take that now, because Mr. Vorse and Mrs. Snell are quite busy, and we certainly don't want to waste their time. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Vorse, come to the mic, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We have a request for $15,000 to cover the cost of additional hours for our building inspector. We have two mitigating circumstances that have come up. Number one, our activity level is incredibly high right now. If you looked at any of the preliminary documents, you'll see that our building permit numbers have increased substantially. The trend is up on those for this and the next fiscal year. And we have a health situation with one of our key employees that came on rather suddenly and has taken him out of I guess, function for the next 3 months or so. So from the time that we put our original, we had originally put in our proposal to hire somebody new, which would have been the cost to pay that person on an hourly basis and cover medical costs and clothing for their uniform. Since then, we have figured out a way to use existing personnel. So basically, the request is for the $15,000. There's roughly 10 hours a week scheduled for the existing employees. There's 5 hours of straight time, 5 hours of overtime as needed. And I guess I'm able to answer any other questions.
Okay. Well, do you take John? No question?
Yeah, Andrew, is that going to, that'll take, I've heard rumblings, and you know, you always hear rumblings about backlog and so forth. Is that going to, do you think that'll take care of it? I just want to make sure that you're not being penny wise, dollar foolish.
No, I think that we've made significant progress already. You know, we've used, we have a new electrical inspector that also has the credentials to do building inspection. So he's taken on some additional duties, and I think we've reduced down the waiting time quite a bit. So, but we want to keep up with that, and, you know, we would come to a point where we'd have to not allow them to continue to work.
But just this, I assume this will take care of it until June of 30th of next year.
Yeah, we expect the person who's out to be back at work within the next, hopefully, 30 to 60 days. So.
Okay. Further, David?
Andrew, do the fees cover all the costs of these inspectors, or do we have a shortfall generally?
I would say we're
proposing an increase.
right. The fees are on the rise. They cover, I would say, most of the cost, but not 100%. On January 21st, we do have a hearing to raise them. So our wiring, plumbing inspectors did a search of other communities and have adjustments that I think will bring the fees up.
Bring it to neutral maybe, or close to it?
Right, and building as well. So.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Further questions? All right, hearing none. Oh, Craig?
Motion to approve?
Oh, motion approved. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Okay, discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Smell. Everybody have a nice evening. Now we'll go back to number 5 on our agenda, review of citizen warrant articles for the annual 2015 annual town meeting with town council. And Mr. Giorgio, thank you for joining us. If you want to step up to the mic, and the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Finance Committee.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Before I don't know if you've met our new member, Joe Grouse?
I don't think I have.
I apologize. I'm sorry. Joe Grouse, John Giorgio, and everybody else you know.
It's a pleasure. Everyone else I know.
I know. I apologize. I'm sorry. I should have done that before.
Thank
Excuse
you.
me. Go ahead.
So hopefully you all have had an opportunity to take a look at the chart for the citizen warrant articles. I'm more than happy to just go through them one by one, and if there are any questions, maybe it's best to just ask as we go along.
Hold on, I appreciate
Okay,
that. Yeah,
great.
that sounds good.
So Article A is the Crowley is the lead petitioner, and it's to rescind Article 90 of the 2014 annual town meeting, which, as you remember, authorized a home rule petition regarding participation in the Barnstable County retirement system. And as that was ultimately passed at town meeting, it was to give a choice to the employees. My understanding is that home rule petition has been submitted through the selectmen and the state representative, and so it's up at the State House now. So generally, you can't rescind something. You can't rescind a prior vote of town meeting if legal rights are vested. But I don't really think this rises to that level, because I think the effect, if this article were to pass at town meeting, assuming the legislature doesn't act in the interim, that is before town meeting, my recommendation would be that that vote be sent back to the legislature, that town meeting, in essence, changed its mind.
And so you just, basically, a representative would just pull it from?
Well, we would notify them. I don't know what the representative would do.
Okay.
But presumably, they would not pursue it at that point,
Okay.
unless there was some question about the vote. But, I think it's difficult. Nantucket has certainly the experience of submitting a lot of home rule petitions. And I do get concerned, and I think other members of town government are concerned, that if you have too many of those, and if you're going back and forth, and we're going to see another example of that later on in the petitioned articles, it does create, frankly, some credibility issues, I think. So I think the town has to be careful about that. If you, in fact, start reversing prior votes, that's just a general comment. The legislature is going to start wondering what's going on down here. But it is in proper legal form. That's the bottom line.
Okay.
My only advice would be that if it is passed, that is, if it is rescinded, that the legislature be so notified.
Fair enough. Okay. Questions from the committee?
Okay?
Okay.
The
Moving on
next-
to B.
The next is Keith Mansfield, who wants to appropriate a sum of money for food and routine veterinary bills for retired canines. The only comment I have about this article is that it really is a general operating budget item. And so I would think that the only thing you could really do here is appropriate a sum of money for fiscal 2016. And that if that passed at town meeting, I think we had some experience in the past with a special article petitions that wind up, if town meeting really wants to do it, then you need to think about incorporating it into your operating budget going forward after 2016.
Right.
That would be my only comment on that.
Okay. All right.
Then the next four
Jim, do
articles.
you have a question? Sorry.
Maybe this isn't a legal one, but doesn't the petitioner have to identify the source of the funds?
Well, I believe
okay.
not in the warrant article.
Not in the warrant
The
article?
motion would have to do that.
Okay.
So either raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds.
So would be dependent on us making a positive recommendation?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Further question? Okay. We'll move on to C.
Well, the next four,
Oh, okay.
I'm going to just take as one.
All right.
If I may,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman.
That's fine.
So it appears to me that Ms. Stover is proposing two different sites as possible sites for a funeral home. One is 4243 Sparks Avenue, and the other is 3 Shadbush Road. And for each of those options, she has two warrant articles. The first is a rezoning. And my comment on those are, obviously, they need to be referred, first of all, to the planning board for a public hearing, because town meeting cannot act on a zoning proposal without a report and recommendation from the planning board. The other issue that I get concerned with when I see one parcel being rezoned is whether or not there's a spot zoning issue. And the Attorney General will pick up on that. And I've seen circumstances where the Attorney General has asked for a further zoning analysis, because you can't spot zone. And spot zone means that you are rezoning a limited parcel of land that is essentially inconsistent with the surrounding land use. And the smaller, the fewer the number of parcels, the smaller the parcel, the more sort of intense that analysis has to get. I have not done any analysis whatsoever, but I think it is something probably for the planning board to look at when they have their public hearing.
Okay.
Doesn't mean you can't rezone a single parcel. It's very fact dependent. So that needs to be looked at.
Okay. Very good. Questions on it? Good.
Didn't we refer to those in the master plan as nodes, where you put one, like a convenience store was in a neighborhood?
As a node?
I think they called it a node.
Yeah, well, I'm not familiar with that, but yeah, I mean, that I could see where that would be an appropriate term. So we do have to be careful of spot zoning, and I don't see that Plus is here anymore, but that's something that they need to pay attention, the planning board needs to pay attention to. The other two articles, and these are, of course, town-owned parcels, they are authorizing the town to dispose of those parcels for funeral home purposes. And the only comment I have is there will need to, if the finance committee is inclined to recommend this, we need to do an analysis of how that land was originally acquired. You've seen in the past warrant articles that transfer the care, custody, control, and management of land from one board to another to be held for the purpose of sale and then to authorize the sale. The reason why you have that language is because the land is held for a specific municipal purpose, as opposed to general municipal purposes.
So I would take it that the planning director would need to do a little research
Yes.
and analysis on this.
Yes, and what you would want to do is look at the votes that were, the vote of town meeting authorizing the acquisition of that land in the first place,
Okay.
and then the deed into the town.
Okay.
And then all of these, I mean, that can clearly be cured, if you will, in the motion itself. And so again, it depends upon whether the finance committee is inclined to recommend
Okay.
either or both of those articles.
I guess just on the side, I would, when Mr. Vorse comes in, I guess sometime in February, to talk about real estate, I would think this will, I'll be sure that this will be on the docket for that, so we probably would hold off on making any kind of a recommendation until after that time.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Article G, Mr. Ryder, he wants to raise and appropriate a sum of money to install granite curbing along the Hooper Farm Road sidewalk and bike path. It's a little bit unusual because he talks about the next time the road is repaved. I'm not sure town meeting can really specify that, but that might be prudent, a prudent practice for the town, not to, you don't want to install granite curbing unless you're doing, a major repaving of the road, I'm thinking.
Would we be limited by the 1 year, the town meeting can only vote on 1 year?
No, I would not look at this as an
Okay.
operating expense. This is more of a capital project.
Okay.
So it would be a special warrant article and it would stay in place even after the close of the fiscal year. I wouldn't note that the warrant article only talks about raise and appropriate. It doesn't talk about transfer from an available fund. So, for example, you couldn't use free cash for this. It also does not authorize borrowing. So this would be an issue of scope for the moderator. But I would think that because of the way the article is written, it's limited to raise and appropriate, meaning to raise on the tax rate for fiscal 16.
Okay. David?
Addressed to John, is this on the capital list?
No,
Okay, so it's never been.
no.
No, this comes right in.
Okay.
We only deal with things over a certain $50,000 level.
We don't know what this is at all. But
Well, I suspect
That was my question. Do anyone know what kind of money we're talking about? Does the applicant bring that forward?
No, but after the public hearing on Monday, if we don't know then, we'll find out.
The petition did not mention any dollar figure, so I don't know. Number H is Erica Mooney's petition to include parcels on Clifton and Burnell Streets in the Sconset Sewer District. It's approved as to form, as far as I'm concerned. And of course, it will have to go to the Board of Selectmen for a recommendation, because as you know, if the selectmen do not recommend this, it's a 2/3 vote at town meeting. If they recommend it, it's a simple majority vote. And I have the exact same comments with respect to number I, Mr. Sanford. This is Tacoma Way and I don't know how to pronounce that. Mishemi Lane?
You got me.
Mishemi Lane? I think I have that right. Okay?
Well, I don't know what that is.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard of that.
Number J?
Number J is Fred Holgate, and it's to amend the zoning map by placing certain parcels on Fairgrounds and Newtown roads, currently in the R10 district, into the CN district.
Okay. And that would go to planning.
And that's approved as to form, subject to, again, a spot zoning analysis, and it must be referred to the planning board for a public hearing. Any questions? I would say a lot of these articles this year, thankfully, are pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But there are a couple in here that are going to take our attention as well. K is Mr. Leonard, and he wants to amend Chapter 125-2 of the Town Code, which would ban the sale and/or use of any type of balloon that is inflated with any type of lighter-than-air gas. So it would ban helium balloons. There's no size limit. So we're not just talking about, balloons that people get in and fly around in. I don't know if anybody ever does that here on Nantucket. But as I read this, it would ban any size balloon.
So like a birthday balloon?
Yes, that you go to the Stop and Shop and you get filled with helium. That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, it would. Now, I think I'm guessing the reason is that if that balloon escapes, it goes off into the air and comes down, and then a dolphin will choke on it. I think that's the theory behind it.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, yesterday at our firm, we hosted a little lunch a lunch meeting with the members of the municipal law unit at the Attorney General's office, because it's always nice to keep in communication. And so I was talking to the head of the municipal law unit, and she said, John, please, if you have anything coming up that's unusual, let us know ahead of time. So I took that opportunity, and I asked Margaret about what her reaction was here. And, there are a lot of articles coming forward, bylaws that the Attorney General's office has approved that ban the sale of certain, or the use of certain items in town, one of which that's very popular now is single-use plastic bags, water bottles, the sale of cigarettes, and generally those have been approved by the Attorney General. But it will be approved, if this were to pass, I think with a caution, because the one issue is this a violation of the United States Constitution Interstate Commerce Clause? The Attorney General will not rule on that. They might give you a caution, but because her job is to analyze these proposed bylaws in terms of consistency with state law. But, we had a very, very, very innocuous bylaw in Provincetown by petition by a very long-standing person who came to town meeting, and it was to ban the sale of cigarettes in vending machines. And it passed. And it went to the Attorney General, and it was approved. And then the entire cigarette industry came down like a ton of bricks on the town of Provincetown. Luckily, the Attorney General intervened in that case in support of that bylaw, and it's a famous case, Take 5 Vending Machines versus the town of Provincetown, and the SJC upheld that bylaw. So to this day, for the last 20 years, you cannot buy a pack of cigarettes in Provincetown from a vending machine. So I only mention it because sometimes these bylaws can seem like a good idea, and then you find yourself in a situation of defending it and incurring legal fees and so forth. I don't know that this one would be challenged, but it's just a caution.
Okay. Well, there is precedent, too. All right, any questions?
And there may be very good reasons why this is a good idea, and it's worth the risk.
Well, not that I know much about this. I always hear about those Mylar balloons that can cause havoc on the beaches, but I never thought of a regular...
Well, I don't know whether, and this is something you may want to ask the petitioner on Monday, whether he intended to limit this But it doesn't appear to have any limitation in the language that's in the petition. Now, there's also a provision in there that basically says if you bring it, if you want to dispose of one of those, you have to put it in a plastic bag and take it to the landfill, and if you don't do that, you get fined. So I'm not quite sure how that would work.
That's a question. In our motion, could we limit the scope of this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
As long as it's within the scope.
Okay.
Anybody, well, the Finance Committee can certainly
But
do
anybody
that.
can use on town meeting floor.
Right. And although the petitioner can certainly move it,
Right.
the way it was printed, the problem is, and I'm going to could I get on my soapbox? The selectmen are extremely proactive by making town council available to help petitioners write articles. And I just wish people would take advantage of that more, so that we don't have those kinds of issues cropping up on town meeting floor, or, I don't know. I know everybody's schedule is busy, but I think it saves a lot, and we're going to see that later on in this warrant, in these petitions as well.
I would agree. I know it started about 5-6 years ago, John? You started that. And thank you, Rick, the audience, yes, because it's a big help for us.
Yeah, it was a little bit better. There was more traffic this year than there was last year.
Good.
So I guess we're making progress, but I don't believe this one was.
Okay.
Okay.
Number L.
Number L, thank you. This is by Mr. Bates, and the only thing on the petition is to continue to maintain the present and existing retirement plans and systems for all employees in the same manner as it has in the past. This isn't to rescind the prior vote. It's not to enact a bylaw. If anything, it's a non-binding advisory vote. And you've seen those before.
Sure.
It would have no legal effect other than to express the will of town meeting.
Okay.
But it's fine
Okay.
in terms of legal form.
Okay.
Is Mr. Bogran coming in?
He just came in. Good afternoon, Mr. Bogran.
Okay, so should I wait on those, or do you want to hear? I mean, they're all basically fine. The first one is to approve the, what am I doing wrong here? To approve the budget transfers or
Right.
return of funds. The next one is to approve the fiscal 16 annual Community Preservation Act recommendations. And then Article O is to authorize the borrowing of $800,000 under the CPA program to fund a grant. That's the one that there was some concern. Sharon Everett in my office wrote an opinion. We have heard back from bond counsel Rick Manley that he agrees with Sharon's opinion. And the bottom line is that, yes, indeed, the town can borrow money in order to provide a grant for community housing, for CPC purposes. The one thing that is not clear in the article, and I think we should fix it in the motion, is this is land owned by the Housing Authority, I believe, and the Housing Assistance Corporation is the developer. And I think it would be better to make it clear in the motion that this is a grant to the Housing Authority with a pass-through to the Housing Assistance Corporation. Because there are provisions in Chapter 121B, which is the Housing Authority, that expressly authorizes towns to borrow money in aid of a housing authority. And without that link, I think it's still, and you'll notice that Rick Manley indicated that he said it was okay
Right.
if it was a grant to the housing authority. I think that makes it very clear. If it goes directly to housing assistance, I still think it's okay, but it's probably best.
Okay.
It's probably best to reference the pass-through from the housing authority to housing assistance. And then the other issue that we've been asked is, how do you make sure that this kind of an appropriation gets expended for the intended purpose? You know, this is clear that you would need to have a grant agreement. You would certainly want to have a affordable housing restriction applicable to this particular grant. And you want to make sure that the level of income eligibility for this project is consistent with the state guidelines for affordability. And those are all things that could be worked out as part of the grant agreement and the restriction, which essentially comes after town meeting. But I know there have been some questions raised about that, and we're looking at that in conjunction with some folks in town to make sure that going into town meeting, we don't have an issue.
Right. Okay.
Okay?
Yep. Questions on that? Anyway. Yeah? No?
I just want to, what you're saying then, the last thing you were talking about as far as making sure that it's consistent with the state
Guidelines.
guidelines. If it's not consistent with the state guidelines, the term guideline throws me off a little bit, but what does that mean? What happens if it's not consistent?
Well, under the Community Preservation Act, the town can appropriate money for community housing. And that has a very specific definition in the CPA. The question here is, our understanding is this is not going to be 100% affordable. It's going to be mixed income. And so you have to make sure that your mix of units in terms of what's affordable as opposed to what's market rate is essentially consistent with sort of the guidelines established by DCHD to ensure that a project qualifies as an affordable housing project. So that's what I mean by that. We need to look at this a little bit further.
What my question was, what happens if it isn't?
Well, in the absolute worst case, this wouldn't be eligible for funding by the Community Preservation Committee or by the town under the CPA program. So we're not going to release money for a development unless it's clear that it is consistent with the CPA program.
It sounds like that needs to be determined.
We're looking at that further.
Pretty quickly.
So we'll hold on. I'm sure, we won't be taking a motion on this until we're darn sure.
Correct. That's correct.
All right. Any other questions?
P is another zoning map amendment. 3 parcels on North Water Street, currently in the LC district, to go into the CDT. Same comments as before.
Okay.
Now, the next 4 articles are by Mr. Barata.
Right.
Q is to appropriate a sum of money for the creation of parking on a public way, Carthcat Road. And that's approved as to form. The next one is to authorize the conveyance of an easement and public right-of-way for beach access on Everett Street, which is a paper street. And this would be a public right-of-way for the benefit of the Nantucket Islands Land Bank, and then to appropriate a sum of money for the construction of parking. There are a few technical problems with this warrant article, but nothing that couldn't be corrected in terms of a motion,
Okay.
if the Finance Committee is inclined to recommend this.
Okay.
Okay? The next one is a similar article having to do with Mataquechum Valley Road. Again, it's to provide a public right-of-way for beach access for the Nantucket Islands Land Bank or other governmental body or nonprofit entity. Again, we need to clean up some of the language in the motion, but it's essentially approved as to form.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to recuse myself from the next conversation.
All right, thank you. So noted. Okay. All right. Good.
So the next one, Article T, is essentially,
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yep.
oh, I'm sorry.
Wait,
I just looked at the map on the airport one where they're providing an easement,
Yes.
and it kind of encroaches on the fence area and some trees and all those things. Has anybody actually given a professional opinion on
Well,
the?
actually, I was going to say it
No.
at the end. I reached out to the planning director, and he wants to do some analysis of these articles.
Yeah.
So to look into that specific, things like that. So as with previous on the funeral home acquisition, these will also fall under those real estate ones. So
Real
we'll
estate.
do some analysis. So we'll hold off on these till then. So
All right.
save your questions till then. Any other questions before we get to T?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Article T is the petitioned article that would essentially in its simplest terms, it would authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into a long-term lease with Nantucket Cottage Hospital for a very specific designated port, well, it's a very complicated description, I'm not sure how specific it is, a portion of the Mill Hill Park, which would have to be used for healthcare, hospital and healthcare-related services. The article is like 3 pages long, and it's got a lot of extraneous and extremely confusing language. At the very end, it talks about dedicating a portion of the water company land, map 54, parcel 45, for park purposes, and it also authorizes a home rule petition for an Article 97 release. So the bottom line is that I don't recommend that the Finance Committee recommend this article in its current form, because it needs a lot of work.
Okay.
And in fact, we'll be working, that is, Town Council will be working to draft a warrant article for the disposition of this land, and it will be, it will be part of the Selectmen's present list of articles. There are some questions where we're waiting from word from the hospital about a plan that would work for them, that would work for the town. I've been talking to their council. We're trying to get something put together that would be appropriate to authorize this transaction.
Okay. Very good.
Now, the reason why I believe Mr. Barata put in the dedication of the water company land is that there's absolutely no question that this parcel is parkland subject to Article 97 of the Massachusetts Constitution, and I don't know whether every planning board member, Finance Committee member is aware of that requirement, but it basically says that land acquired as parkland or open space or water supply protection is protected land and can only be disposed of with not just a vote of town meeting by a 2/3 vote, but by a vote of both houses of the legislature by a 2/3 vote as well. So that's the Article 97 release that's talked about in this article. And you've done that several times before, because the problem is Article 97 has been construed or defined to include a lot of land that you wouldn't think was parkland or open space, but it has been basically by the Attorney General and by the courts. So and I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but the legislature has a policy that whenever an Article 97 petition comes to them from a town, they refer that to the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs for a recommendation, and the Executive Office has a policy that they apply, which may or may include a requirement for replacing the land that's lost to parkland for another equivalent, for other land that is then dedicated for an equivalent use. Whether or not that's going to be necessary in this instance, might there be other things that can be done here short of dedicating other town land? That's a question that I know we've been looking at. There might be other town land that is a potential rather than the water department land. So this is all very much in flux, but the message I wanted to give to the Finance Committee is you will most likely see a warrant article from the Selectmen dealing with this issue.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Any questions?
Questions? Okay. Moving on to you.
So you is a petition from the town clerk to appropriate $11,600 to replace 2 servers for the archival Laserfiche system. From a legal standpoint, it's approved as to form.
Okay.
Okay? Same with Article V, which is $49,000 to purchase custom archival shelving for the town clerk's new vault. So I'm sure Catherine will be able to explain that in more detail to the committee.
We have a public hearing on Monday. We'll be waiting.
Then we have a series of zoning amendments proposed by Mr. Reed, Attorney Reed. Those are all approved as to form. They have to be referred to the planning board for a public hearing. They're changing some definitions of ownership. They're a definition for the term municipal, and also inserting a new subparagraph under the height limitation that takes into consideration land that is in certain flood zones. I'm sure Mr. Reed will be more than capable of explaining his rationale, but those are all approved as to form.
Okay, very good.
Okay, everybody with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
On to Z.
Article Z is the first of several petitions from Linda Williams. The first one is a special legislation that would essentially repeal the act that was passed pursuant to the Home Rule petition approved at last year's town meeting that, as you recall, created a hybrid historic district commission of 3 elected and 2 appointed. This one would essentially reverse that.
Yep, I think we remember that. Questions?
And it's approved as to form from a legal standpoint.
And it's the same thing as the, with Article A, the same kind of rationale.
Yes.
For credibility.
Well, it's a concern.
Yes.
It's a concern. Now, the next one, these are all like, I don't mean to speak for Linda, but I think she's sort of ramping up, you know, she's trying to address different issues that she sees with respect to the Historic District Commission. And by the way, I have no idea whether her 3 articles are being supported by the rest of the HDC or not, but I suppose that's something you can ask her on Monday. But Article AA makes some targeted amendments to the special legislation. You know, it's sort of difficult to summarize the, you know, so forgive me if I've missed anything, but I've tried to highlight the important things. So it would allow the HDC members to receive compensation for their services. Currently, the special act says they shall be unpaid. Now, from a finance committee standpoint, the issue here is if you are an elected official and you receive any compensation, you are eligible to receive health benefits under the town's program. Okay? Now, a lot of towns have enacted special legislation that makes such elected officials ineligible. I don't, have you done that? I don't think Nantucket has done that. So that would have potentially a fiscal implication, at least with respect to how many members of the commission wind up being elected. It deletes the requirement that they be resident taxpayers of the town. I'm sorry, do I have that right? I thought it required them to be resident taxpayers of the town. You can just bear with me for
Sure,
half
take
a
your
minute.
time. Yeah, that's fun.
I want to make sure, I don't want to misrepresent anything.
What would that mean anyway? What's the definition of a resident taxpayer?
No, they're non-resident taxpayers.
80%. Okay, so it's not a property taxpayer, it's just a taxpayer.
No, it's a non-registered voter taxpayer.
Versus a registered taxpayer, non-property owner.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know.
.com.
Does get confusing.
I believe she's eliminating, if I understand this correctly, she's eliminating the requirement that the members be resident taxpayers of the town.
Okay. So that's correct as written.
Well, I don't know. That's how I interpret this.
That's your interpretation, okay, that's correct as written.
What does that mean?
See,
I mean, I understand what delete means, but,
see, normally, you're eligible to serve on a town board if you're a registered voter.
yeah.
You don't have to be a resident. So I guess, and I apologize, because I meant to look this up, but apparently your existing HDC Act requires you to be a resident taxpayer?
Okay.
Which I find hard to believe, to be honest with you. You'd have to own property in order to serve on the, so I apologize. I meant to look at that just to make sure I understood exactly, but from the face of what she submitted, she's deleting that requirement that you be a resident taxpayer.
Okay. All right.
It allows for the appointment of alternates by the Board of Selectmen. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong one here. Okay, it authorizes the chair to appoint alternates to sit on cases for a new reason that's being added. Unwillingness to act because of self-interest. That's a bit of an unusual term. The term is really whether there's a conflict of interest. Right. And if somebody has a conflict of interest, it's not their decision whether to serve or not. They are precluded from serving. So I think that creates sort of an interpretation issue, which is probably not a good idea. Yes?
Would the chair have the authority to determine whether someone is unwilling to act because of self-interest?
Sure sounds like it.
Well, I think that would be an extraordinary power to grant to a chair. I suppose you could do that in a special act, but the opportunity for mischief would be tremendous.
Understood, but would you make that interpretation from the way the petition is?
Yes, I would.
Okay, thank you.
I would. And I don't think it's a good idea. Because you can, you get a guy like Matt, he'll become the king of the finance committee and can tell people, hey, I think you have a self-interest, and then you're disenfranchised from voting. I don't think you want that.
Jim, just keep that in mind.
Worry about that.
John, when you say it's approved as to form, but then you raise these other issues, does that change your
No.
opinion about this?
No, I mean, it's in proper legal form. Right. That's all I'm saying.
But do you also give an opinion about whether, it's the things in here are legal to have someone
Well,
do?
let me explain that. I can approve something as to form
Right.
and still raise concerns about its legal implications, okay? Because of the way it may be interpreted in the future. I think the legislature could potentially pass this as written, assuming town meeting approves it. I don't see a fatal legal defect in the form, but if it creates an ambiguity in how it's going to be applied, I think that's important for the Finance Committee to take that into consideration, because as we know, when you have imprecise legislation, it can lead to litigation and costs for the town. That's all I'm suggesting.
So there's risk,
There is a risk.
but it's not. It doesn't rise to the level of your questioning whether it's legal, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
But I see my role as both of those.
No, I agree. I see it as something you'd want to put in your column, but that's okay if you don't, just so I understand it.
Yeah.
Feel free to add it in. David?
So Jim brings up a good question, John. So how on something, and this is pretty complicated and dense with lots of ramifications, how do we as a FinCom, begin to get some guidance to understand perhaps the secondary and tertiary impacts of making these decisions?
Well, I have a suggestion. All three of these articles that purport to amend the HDC, I think each one is fraught with some potential problems. In particular, the third one that we haven't even gotten to yet. And my recommendation is that the Finance Committee not recommend any of these for approval at town meeting because of those legal concerns, and I'll go through them in particular in Article 3. My understanding was that there was an ad hoc group put together by, I believe it was by the selectmen, to really look at the HDC Act. George Pucci, Attorney Pucci in my office, has met with the HDC, has provided them with some guidance about how to proceed. We think that process needs to come to a conclusion, and that as much of a consensus as possible among the group, the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, the HDC, try to come up with an agreement as to what it is you're trying to accomplish and what makes most sense for Nantucket. And until then, piecemeal amendments to the HDC Act, unless there's something very glaringly wrong, I would not suggest that you pursue it that way. That's my recommendation. And in particular, Article BB has some very, very significant policy implications, not to mention legal deficiencies in terms of interpretation. And I feel very strongly that that article is not ready for prime time. Could it be fixed in a motion? Well, it maybe could be, but how would you fix it in the limited time that you have? And how would you fix it? Because of the policy questions that are raised. And if I'm happy to go through those with you. I think the intent of Article BB is essentially to try to craft an historic district commission that is more like a statutory 40C, that's General Laws Chapter 40C, Historic District Commission, which is the state model in the general laws. Now, when your HDC was first created, it was done by special act, and that's perfectly fine. I don't think you're the only town that's done that. But to try to take a very targeted special act and incorporate into that sort of the general provisions under Chapter 40C, you have to be extremely careful. And we don't think that's a good way to approach it at all. You will see in Article BB, there are references to a city council, because those references appear in 40C. There's references to a bylaw, because under 40C, that's the way you sort of incorporate all of your substantive provisions. There's also a reference to the Nantucket Regional Planning Agency. Now that provision talks about eliminating the appeals to the Board of Selectmen and instead having the Nantucket Regional Planning Agency hear those appeals, or appoint a panel to hear those appeals. There are provisions in this that where the HDC can hire their own staff, subject to appropriation. That's in conflict with the charter, which provides a very structured delineation of authority under the town administration. Could you do that by special act? I suppose you could. Would you want to have a result where you have a special act saying one thing and your town charter saying something else? No, not unless you want your lawyers to become rich, basically. Well, as rich as they can be in municipal law.
So, Mr. Chairman, in the absence of either a written opinion from town council, I know personally I'll rely on the minutes because I won't remember all this very complex, but this is all very good to know, and I think it'll have to be part of any conversation we have in a public hearing and any kind of action we take.
Yeah, thank you. And David, then John.
John, on BB, it says there's a clause that says accepts gifts of money. Is that truly written in there, that one could make a gift of money to the HDC as a private citizen?
Well, they can do that now under the general laws, Chapter 44, Section 15A, with a very important control. The expenditure of that money has to be approved by the Board of Selectmen. That's what the statute says. Nantucket, as every other town, does that all the time. But you really need to have some centralized control over how that money is expended, because otherwise, you know, is it being expended for the purposes of the gift? It's that kind of thing, David, where I just wouldn't recommend putting that in the special act. If there's already a mechanism to deal with that, just as there's a mechanism in your charter to deal with the hiring of employees, why would we want to create a separate, inconsistent process?
John?
Yeah, I'm with Jim. You lost me at the first corner, and I'm not sure that we'll get enough of it in the minutes. I'm wondering if it's possible for you to give us kind of a list of difficulties you see within this. Not that it's not legality of it, but the difficulties you see or inconsistencies that you see here.
Okay. I mean, if that's what you want, I can certainly do that. But I will tell you that our recommendation to the HDC, to the Finance Committee, to the Board of Selectmen, is the first thing you have to do is all get together and decide from a policy perspective what you want your HDC to look like. And then don't try to amend your existing special act by bringing in all this extraneous stuff. It's better you just start from scratch. And there are two ways you can do this. You can create a whole new separate special act, or you can just follow the 40C process, which is the selectmen appoint a study committee, they hold a public hearing, they prepare a bylaw, it goes to town meeting, it's approved by a 2/3 vote, and you've got your HDC. The only complicating factor here is you already have a special act HDC, so you're going to have to deal with another special act to just get rid of that, whether you follow this first approach, which is a wholesale new special act, or you do the 40C route. And there are lots of policy implications there. So I could certainly put something together, but it's almost losing the forest through the trees, I think, to be honest with you.
I'm just wondering, and maybe I'm not being naive, I think what you have listed here is almost enough to satisfy us moving forward either way.
Well,
I don't know what a list would do. I'm not quite sure, so I'm looking over at you.
We talked about a lot of,
Microphone.
excuse me.
That's right.
We were talking about a lot of taking the items here and then getting into them in depth. And as Jim said, he missed it. He hopes that the minutes will have it. But
How about this, if I can make a suggestion? What about, what resonated with me was how the different acts would compete with the different acts? Maybe what about a summary that way? We're looking at the holistic, the whole picture, instead of going to each detail. 'Cause I think they're right here, but just as a general statement on why these changes would be confusing to the special act. How about something like that?
yeah, well, I mean, I could very easily take this and generate a list, and then also put in the,
I just want to.
I'm happy to do that if that's what you want.
Trying to get things. Dave?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think something like that, because I would assume we're going to end up with a comment on this.
that's what
And I think our comment is going to, should probably have some substance to it, which we're hearing is probably beyond the kin of
Right. I think
all of us.
that's what we're leading up to, because basically that's what
kind of where I was going.
Well, it is, and I think, but and we're just looking for more general, concise.
Yep.
That's what I'm suggesting, so, anyway. Christie?
John, is this addressing the issue that you mentioned about the home rule and going to the state? And does that have any relevance? This particular,
Well, you've got three different petitions. You don't want to send three different petitions up to the legislature on amending your historic district committee. I don't think you do. I just think that's going to be, I mean, I suppose if they all three passed, we could cobble it together into one, but you really want the legislature piecemeal looking at these issues. So my comment about excessive number of home rule petitions would apply in this circumstance. Now, maybe Linda separated them out because she thought some would be less controversial than others, and she might be right about that. The second one is fairly straightforward. The first one is actually straightforward. It's just a reversal of something you just voted on in April. The last one is the really difficult one, because that's where there's, I mean, not that there aren't policy issues in the other two, but it's very confusing when you read it. There's a tremendous amount in there, and there's no indication to me that the Historic District Commission even has approved this. So just trying to educate everyone on it without having a community input, I just think it's going to be a mess at town meeting.
yeah.
Christie,
I think even before all the details, this is something that we just voted on. I think it would be nice to put in the comment that we just voted to change this for reasons that we discussed last year. And that I think that one reason to not approve it is to see how the one we voted on works out. And I don't know.
Correct. Well, you could certainly separate that one out if you wanted to.
David?
Yeah, to either Libby or Rick, do we know where the group is that's working on the changes? Where they are in the process? Are they stalled? Are they moving at glacial pace?
The minority group has not come back to the board with any presentation of any kind.
Well, and I'll add,
We don't have a formal report to that committee.
And I'll add to that, I've asked about that too, because I don't know if members on town meeting floor, that was part of our comment, and I haven't gotten any traction with it. And that was with a couple of the members who are supposedly in it. So, and I think that's something that, as time goes forward, I think we can bring that up as a legitimate point. I agree. Fred, thank you. Further questions? Well, thanks for putting that together. Oh, Craig?
Just a question for John. Are you planning on attending the hearing next Monday?
No, I was not.
No, we'll have another public hearing on February
Ninth.
9th, and so will be more satisfactory. Because some of these we'll be able to, we will act on, some others are going to need some more analysis. So unfortunately, we won't, and we want to do our due diligence, we'll have to wait.
But in the interim, I'll certainly get you
Yes,
a standalone document, if you will.
we appreciate that.
Not a problem.
Okay, so if, any other questions on BB? Or any of the AA, BB? Okay, so we move to CC, which is the amend the sewer
She's
bylaw.
striking that out. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, we're just going to move ahead to CC.
CC is another petition by Linda Williams. It's to amend the sewer bylaw to include certain parcels on South Pasture Lane and South Shore Road into the sewer district.
Now, there's one question I have, maybe this is for Libby or for you, Rick, again, I'm sorry. Wasn't this brought up previously?
Yes.
This was? Okay. Okay, thank you, that's all.
I think it was part of
There may be,
That's what I thought.
there may be a town administration article that deals with inclusions in the sewer district, as a,
As we'll see. We'll find out.
and
Okay.
so obviously, it may render some of these moot.
Okay.
And then last is Isaiah Stover. Now, this would amend the zoning bylaw to create a new definition of quote-unquote tiny house, which I believe is under 5,000 square feet.
Okay. That's what that is.
That seems like an awfully big house to me, but that I...
500.
Is it 500 square feet? Oh, okay. It would allow it would be an allowed use in all zoning districts by special permit or as an accessory use. And it would prohibit the use of trailers or building-like containers for residential purposes except such structures that meet that definition of tiny house. And storage trailers as are necessary for the storage of chemicals by the fire department. So again, this needs to go to the planning board for a public hearing. Mm-hmm. The one concern I would have with this article is not that it isn't in proper legal form, but, is it going to create some definitional problems in terms of storage units and storage structures and so forth. So I think the planning board needs to pay some attention to that issue when they consider this at their public hearing.
Okay. Any questions at all? Any questions or general comments on any of the citizen warrant articles?
Okay?
Okay. John, thank you very much. You're welcome. Informative as always. We'll do a little more discussion now and then. All righty. Next item, number 7, is the presentation of the Community Preservation Committee articles by the Community Preservation Committee, and the chairman, Ken Bogran, is here. Ken, thank you for coming. If you can step up to the mic. Do you know everybody on the committee? No. Joe Grouse is our new member. Joe's Ken Bogran, chairman of the Community Preservation Committee. For how many? For a number of years. Okay. So good.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I've got to recuse myself.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So, Ken, the floor is all yours.
I should probably recuse myself, too.
Okay. All right. We'd like to start with, start wherever you want to start. How about that?
Doesn't matter, whichever one you want to start with.
Well, in our packet, we just have the appropriation for fiscal year 2016. You want to start with that? I mean, I'm looking at starts with historic preservation.
Okay.
I need to probably recuse myself.
Okay.
I do too.
All right. Well, we're not voting on anything.
Well, I sit on the Habitat Board too, but I don't see why I can't sit here and listen to the presentation.
You certainly can listen. We're not going to take any motions. So actually, we can listen.
I'm not
I'm
recusing
perfectly comfortable with everybody sitting and listening.
I'm going to stick around.
I'm sticking around too. I'm on nothing. Ken, go ahead. Thank you.
I guess that means that we're doing a pretty good job with respect to addressing community needs.
I guess so. I never thought of it that way.
This year, we spent time with Brian, the new finance director of the town, to get clarity again with respect to where we are relative to the funds available for this year's fund allocation and for future allocation. And when we came through with all the numbers, we ended up deciding that we were going to set up a reserve, not use certain of the monies that would be available, and have them as designated reserves for future use. And so in the area of open space, because of the nature of the projects, we have left $273,553 available for open space for future years. And in the area of fully undesignated reserves, we had about $664,000 and change available. We only used $240,000, so we have about $400,000 in that for future use. That, together with one of the other articles relative to the funding that's coming back, will mean that for future use, we will have about $1.4 million available, most of it in designated categories as opposed to undesignated categories. All right, so that's an update in terms of where we are currently, together with what we anticipate will be approved coming back to the CPC.
Okay.
Relative to the allocations that we made, I think you're aware that it is our obligation to address the needs of the community as we see at each time that we look at the amount of funds that are available for allocation. In the area of historic preservation, this still was perceived to be a very important need, and so the articles that we recommended are listed on our warrant article. Coffin School was a continuation of a project that we have funded in the past. This is to continue the preservation of the facade of the school. The South Church Preservation Fund, that was something that we had done in the past. This is a new request, and we voted to fund the full amount of the request relative to the restoration of the roof on the Unitarian Meeting House, which is the town clock. First Congregational Church, they had a significantly larger request. Because of the limited amount of funds, we agreed to recommend funding for $150,000. That would be matching the amount of funds that they said they would be able to raise to this project. We anticipate that they will be coming back in next year and other future years to help finish out their funding request with respect to that. With respect to the Nantucket Historical Association, last year we had funded work with respect to the old jail and its restoration. In the process, they discovered that there was additional work that needed to be done underneath the jail because of the fact that the building had set on the ground. And so this is half of the cost of funding to provide the restoration to the balance. The NHA itself is providing the other half of those funds. In many of these instances, you're hearing about we're asking for the applicants to make efforts to be able to raise additional funds from outside us to be able to have our awards go much further within the community. And to the extent that that's possible, that's one of the things that we have been doing, and it's been fairly effective. With respect to the Nantucket Islands Land Bank, we had given them a grant last year to the start of the preservation of the historic clubhouse. They had asked for a significantly larger grant this year because of the limited amount of the funds and because of the fact that the land bank does have an ability to raise funds. We gave them a very limited amount, and this will be the last award that we would give them, and they have indicated that they do not plan to come forward to us with respect to any future awards in the area of historic preservation. As to the African American Meeting House, this is the third phase of the preservation of that, and this is the restoration of the foundations and the buildings and providing some handicapped accessibility. These are the buildings that you're aware of at Five Corners. The meeting house itself has been restored, and these are the next 3 or 4 buildings down York Street towards the water that are being restored. They have done a significant amount of work archaeological work as well as others, and they found a major amount of data there that unfortunately has to go to the state and be on exhibition in the state in terms of a lot of the artifacts from that community when it was living there over the centuries. The hospital thrift shop, this is the first time that they have come. They're an independent 501c3. They are not owned by the hospital, but they are totally separate from the hospital, and they are looking for work to restore the interior of that historic structure. And we provided them with a portion of the request that they had made to us. And lastly, Preservation Institute Nantucket. This is funding to complete the laser scanning project, which is providing scans of all of the historic buildings in the downtown area, which are available on computer so that anyone will be able to have access. That was part of the condition of the request, that the scans themselves be made available to anybody that wants to see them. So the total of the monies recommended for historic preservation was $1,018,177, and all of that monies were to come out of our CPC fund and the state matching funds for this year. With respect to affordable housing, this was the category that we felt was most critical for us this year, and that's why there is the amount allocated in this article as well as the separate bond article that John spoke about earlier. And I'll address some of the issues that he raised relative to the bond question when we get to that.
Okay.
As respects to the Interfaith Council, this is for the Housing and Rental Assistance Program. As everyone is aware, that is a really critical need, and we have raised the allocation slightly this year up to $130,000. What we are really very comfortable with, the program is administered by Janice Carrera, who is very effective in terms of it, and what they do is that they make sure that any of the funds that are given with respect to rental assistance are only used in they're short-term rentals, but they're only used in properties that qualify as legal dwellings for rental here on the island, because there was a real concern that we had that with the nature of the type of rentals that do go on, that we could be funding not legal apartments. So we're very satisfied that is the case, that any monies that go are only with respect to dwellings that comply with the law.
Did they request more than the 130,000, or
this is their request?
This is what they requested.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
Thank you.
Habitat for Humanity. We've had a very good track record with them. We have almost effectively funded them each year. Their track record with us has been very, very positive in terms of delivering housing. This approach was different this year. This will allow them to use some funds to pay some outside contractors to speed up the process, because we now have the ability to have additional proper land available, which wasn't necessarily the case in the past. In fact, the Sachem's Path, a number of those units at Sachem's Path are dedicated to habitat housing. Probably one of these will be, in the next year, will be out at Sachem's Path. There are also two that are on behalf, in the back of this property here, the town property over here.
And how many of Sachem's Path, how many units are dedicated at Sachem's Path?
Sachem's Path will have 40 units.
40
and
units.
all 40 units will be affordable, and all 40 units will have an affordable restriction on them, and all will be within the 80 to 150% of the AMI for Nantucket.
Okay. And of the 40 units, how many will be Habitat for Humanity?
4.
4. Okay. Great.
10%.
Super. Thank you.
The next allocation was to the Housing Assistance Corp., and we allocated, their request was for $1,600,000 to complete Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the infrastructure to be able to then move forward with the construction of the 40 units. We have given them money in the past to start with the Phase 1. And last year, we gave them a very limited amount, but what we did that was to show them that the community was still supportive of the Satcham's Path project, but that we were not going to move forward until the state stepped up to the bar and, in fact, put their money into the project. That transpired last year, and the state gave the largest award that they had given to any one particular project to Housing Assistance Corp. To move forward with Phase 1. So the amount of the monies here, together with the $800,000 bond that we're requesting that the town approve, comes very close to the $1.6 million that HAC says that they need to complete Phase 1 and Phase 2 for the infrastructure.
And how much did the state give? Do you know, if you mind me asking? Thank you.
The state gave $1,485,000 in their grant last year.
Okay, great, thank you. And that all went to Phase 1, correct?
Yes,
Okay,
that's correct.
thank you. All right, very good.
Housing Nantucket asked for double the amount that we allocated to them. This was to create 4 dwelling units over on Surfside Road, on that parcel of land across from the school. We told them that with the monies that they had for other projects and what we felt that they could do this year, we were only going to allocate half of that so that it could be used to build 2 of the homes on that project, and that if that's successful, they can come back next year, and we'll consider whether or not we'll fund, based on what we have, the additional 2. But again, it's all affordable housing with respect to our guidelines. So the subtotal for housing was $1,445,000. Of that, we had reserves from community housing of $209,999 that we will be using to fund this, and the balance will come from the CPC surcharge and the state matching funds. With respect to open space, the first item in the open space is to the town of Nantucket for $125,000, which is a third payment on the bond that was previously authorized with respect to the creation of the artificial turf playing field out at Nobody Farm Road. That's 3 out of 10. So we have 7 more payments to make with respect to that. Then Sustainable Nantucket. There was a change to the definitions within the Community Preservation Act, and it expanded community farming as a category within the open space category to be able to receive funds from under the Community Preservation Act. And so what we've done is this was less than the request because the request included some items that couldn't be funded under the Community Preservation Act. So this is for funding the activities that are allowable, and it's helping with the creation of a 2-acre community farm on land bank property out in Hummock Pond Road, right, the land behind the brewery and around the brewery. And then the last was because of the fact that we have to allocate 10% to each particular category, because the requests for open space were below the amount of 10% of the total amount that we have to that we are allocating this year. We designate that shortfall into designated reserves for designated for open space for future years. So that will be added to the reserves that we previously had and will be available in future years. Again, all of those funds are from the surcharge, the state matching funds. The last portion is the administrative budget. That was increased to $125,000 because of we have had to move out of the premises that we've been in for 12 years. We're moving into the Coffin School premises. We've been advised by town council the fact that Coffin School got an award does not create a conflict of interest and doesn't prevent us from having entered into the lease with the Coffin School for the space for the Community Preservation Committee. So that brings the total amount of the funds that we are proposing to allocate this year to $2,878,177. And they are allocated as indicated in the sources, $1,887,973 from the estimated surcharge from the CPC. That's the 3% of the real estate taxes paid. State matching funds, we estimate that moving forward, and we have estimated that at a conservative number, I believe it was 27%, getting to the $509,753 numbers.
Okay.
We expect the interest income on the monies that are still sitting there waiting to be expended because one of the things that we do as a CPC is we hold the monies, and then when the project's moving forward, the applicants spend the money and then come back to us to be reimbursed. And so that means that there are funds that are available out there that are earning interest, and that is available for us to be able to utilize to allocate out. And then we used designated reserves from community housing for $209,999, and from the undesignated reserves of the $664,000 that I mentioned before, we're using $260,452.
Okay.
So that totals to $2,878,177.
Very good. Well, thank you. Now, before we go on, I was remiss in, I always like to give a little overview at the beginning of, for the money. And since, Joe, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Community Preservation Act, but there are three categories: historic preservation, community housing, and open space. Of the money that is raised, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, 10%, at a minimum of 10% has to go into each category, and then the discretion of the committee to go over that. And so that's why the open space that designated for reserves were to get to that 10% requirement. Right. Am I saying that correct?
Yeah, absolutely right.
Okay. I just wanted to clear up. I should have said that earlier. Thank you. Now,
Right.
back to you.
I'll be happy to answer any questions relative to those
Christie.
proposals.
Ken, thanks. Sounds like you guys have a lot of checks and balances. That's good to hear, as far as giving the money out and researching each item. I have a question, sustainable. There's, from what I know, there's two gardens that Sustainable, I think, has dropped the ball on in the past. One's at the school, between the schools, the ballpark, there's a garden back there, and then there's one at Small Friends.
Mm-hmm.
So what's their take on this? And I'm worried that they're going to.
Well, we were comfortable on it, Christie, because of the fact that it's in conjunction with the land bank, and it's on land bank land. And so the bulk of this is for the setup and the establishment of it, and to be able to, so it's not relative to the ongoing maintenance. That's going to be the oversight of the land bank. So we felt that this was an important thing for the community to be able to, particularly with the change in the nature of the people that are living on the island now, who many of whom are comfortable with respect to sort of the farming experience or having sort of smaller gardens and stuff like that. So that was the reason that the committee felt that this was an appropriate. It's almost like seed money to be able to get them set up and started. So
Yeah, not a great amount, but
yeah, no, yeah.
Did you have a question, Joe?
Yeah, just a quick, overall, in terms of the CPC, Ken, so the largest chunk comes as 3% of the taxes paid in fiscal, sort of like fiscal 16 is 3% of fiscal 15?
Yeah. What we're doing is we always have to move forward, and that was so what we can do is we have to estimate. That's why this is an estimate of what we estimate the revenue will be based on the fiscal 15's income.
Okay, so this is an 3% of estimated fiscal year 16 receipts.
Right.
And an estimate of the match that the state.
That's
gives you.
correct, correct.
Wasn't there something, actually, Matt, didn't you send something around that the governor was cutting back on certain, I mean, is that
Well, the
is
thing,
that something that put some of your matching monies from the state in any jeopardy, or?
we don't think so, because of the fact that that's why our estimate with respect to the state matching fund, we think is fairly conservative. This year, the monies that we received were significantly above that, but the fact is that the funding from the state comes from two sources. It comes from the receipts on real estate transactions. That generates the bulk of the state matching funds. And then the community preservation groups throughout the state have lobbied the state. 2 years ago, because of the budget surplus, they were able to add $50 million to the pool that was allocated amongst to all of the community preservations. This year, it was only 25, and so so our sense of what we're projecting here is on the assumption that it may be nothing. There may not be another 25. So we're fairly comfortable that we're within the range of where we should be. So, and this is what's happened is that a lot of the communities around the state have discovered the value of the CPC. We were one of the very first communities to realize the benefit of it. And so as more and more communities are realizing how to be able to do things within their communities that they might not otherwise do, they're joining the CPC. And so it becomes a more powerful voice to their legislators relative to the allocation of state funds to this particular initiative. So it's a fair question, though.
And just to add on to that, sorry. So if you actually get allocated more than 509,000, does that just sort of go into your reserve?
It will go into undesignated reserves for use in future years. Yeah.
Great.
Right.
Thank you. Thanks.
That's right, no. Further questions? Okay. Hearing none, why don't we move on to...
The second easy one?
Yeah, this is the budget transfers?
Yeah.
Okay.
The transfers back are some projects that, the first one is from the Nantucket Human Services Center back to the CPC, $159,925.06. This was an attempt to create a common Nantucket Human Services Center. We spent about a little bit less than the same amount of this money in terms of all of the planning and working together. And the 501c3 that was trying to pull it together, it didn't work. And so it's something that is not going forward. So the balance of the funds are coming back for us to be going into community housing. The housing that was proposed under this project was close to the area where Sachem's Path is. So Sachem's Path is in fact using up the same land that was available, but a totally different project.
Okay.
The second thing is that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we had granted them $160,000 to do a structure on the land that is across from the high school, which is part of the allocation that we're making to Housing Nantucket this year. So they didn't use these funds. They gave that land to Housing Nantucket to be able to do it, and so are returning these funds back to us. So in effect, while these are different years, this money, you could in fact say that it's going back out to Housing Nantucket for the same project, although that's legally not what's happening, but in effect it's what's happening. And then the last one is there are two more. The town of Nantucket had received some monies with respect to the planning and land use services for the survey out on Wee Weeda Pond, and that cost less than was required, and so that money is coming back. And then lastly, the Nantucket Hunting Association, we had given them a grant with respect to creating open space. That project is not going forward, And so all of the money from that was allocated is coming back, and that will be available for open space in the future. So that totals, I didn't total all three of them together, but there was $319,000 that goes into community housing, and $422,650 that goes into open space reserves.
Okay, thank you. Questions on the transfers? Okay, very good. Moving on along, in the last article, and just referencing that John Giorgio talked about this, and that it is in legal form, but a little more work needs to be fine-tuned.
We're very happy to work with John to clearly put it in the correct legal form. What I wanted to stress was the fact that all 40 properties will be for affordable housing. This is not the usual 40B in the sense where you have properties that are market rate. Thanks, Joe. Market rate properties. All of these properties will be affordable, and they will all have easements, restrictions on them that are to go in perpetuity, so that the property always stays affordable. Okay. And as I say, four of them are dedicated to habitat, and the other 36 will be people who qualify. They have already started the process, teaching people what they have to do in order to be able to pull together all the financial documentation that you need to be able to get the mortgages to be able to do them.
So when do you foresee the first occupancy?
We're thinking that it may be as early as at the latter part of 16, but more likely in 17.
17. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And again, the essence is that to raise money for a bond, and this is a 10-year bond?
It would be a 10-year bond. It would be, we patterned it on the bond that we did for the artificial turf playing field. And that then, and there was a lot of discussion with respect to that, because what it says is that for the next 10 years, we have to take the amount, it's usually $80,000 to $80,000 plus a factor of interest out each year. It automatically comes off the top, just as 125 comes up out of open space with respect to it. So that was a fair amount of discussion. That's why we put as much into the article in the first article that we talked about with respect to the Sachem's Path project, as opposed to putting it into the bond project. So.
All right, thank you. Questions? The only question I have is more of a general one. When going back 3 years now about the playing fields, is that it seemed to stand out that was a one-time thing, a one-time proposition at the time, and now we're here with this again, and I understand the reasons. Do you foresee any future bondings at all?
I'll tell you that my sense of the CPC is that we didn't like to do the bonding. We would much rather have not done it, but it was the only way that we saw that we could address the housing needs together with addressing the other issues of the community needs in terms of the dollars that we had to allocate. And our concern was that the timing of this with respect to the bond and the amount of money to be able to get phase 1 and phase 2 done was by breaking it up, and by it would escalate the costs, and it would also escalate the time before the project would in fact be able to be fully there. So, but I guess that's not an answer to your question. The answer to your question is my guess is that the likelihood of us coming back and looking for bonding for future projects is probably not great. I mean, I can't speak for the whole committee, but I can speak for the sense of the committee. It was not an easy decision for us to decide to recommend a bond.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Questions? Christie?
Ken, question on the community housing allocation really quick. If I may step back to the allocations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right.
If that's all right. You have one for Habitat and you have one for housing assistance. And both refer to Sachem's, have some reference to Sachem's. And I'm wondering as if...
No, Housing Assistance Corporation is the Sachem's Path project, okay? That's the major project. The Habitat one, Habitat will probably use some of the funds to build out one of the first of the 4 houses that they have allocated in the Sachem's Path project.
Okay, but they will not get any of the Housing Assistance Corporation funds that apply
No,
to Sachem's?
absolutely not,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
Christie, the HAC funds are for infrastructure. They're for putting in the roads, the sewers, the drainage, all of the work that's being done now in terms of the land being there. It's all for the prep work to be able to have the project ready to be able to build and build houses on it.
All right, thank you.
Further questions? Okay. Well, Ken, thorough as always, thank you.
Well, thank you.
We do have a public hearing on Monday, and after that, we may entertain a motion to take, and if we do, I'll certainly let you know.
Okay,
on
is
that.
it necessary for me to?
No, I don't think, I'm just letting you know.
Okay.
I'm just letting you
All
know.
right.
I don't know, not at all. I don't know if anybody from the public will comment, but, you know, we're certainly,
Okay,
I think we heard everything.
good, all right.
All righty?
Thanks.
Have a nice evening. Okay, so that's all set. We come on back.
How are we going to vote on that?
I'm thinking the same thing. I'm gonna have to go to town council. I can vote on that, right? Get an opinion, or I guess, but, okay. So the date of our next meeting, before we get to that, there was one other thing to tidy up. In the packet today, you'll see a schedule for our meetings. In my packet, it's just from, there's supposed to be 2 pages. I just have 1. Did everybody have 2?
I have 2.
Okay, good, all right. And just so that, I would just ask if you haven't looked it over, look it over. Any questions, bring them up. We will try, as last year, if we can cut down on the number of meetings, I certainly will try, but we'll take it as it comes. For example, so I'm thinking as we were going
Did
through...
anything change?
Not really.
I
don't think so.
From what was sent out before?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Martin, nothing's changed. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think we're all
I
set.
just have them all on my calendar.
No, I think I don't think anything has.
Just a date on the top, there was a minor update when I removed the December 1st.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one change that may be coming up, and is that, anyway, here, I'm sorry. Listening to the triage, there on the citizen warrant articles, there are some articles that aren't ready for us to take a motion yet. It would be a little bit immature, premature to do that, and it may be immature for me to do it. So we may only need 1 meeting, either the 11th or the 15th, and to talk about those. I don't know if we need 2 meetings to talk about them or not. I would suggest that we keep our meeting scheduled for the 11th, and if we don't need the 15th, we can cancel at that time. How does everyone feel about that?
The
Okay.
11th of December?
That week from today.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
week from today. And so if we get enough progress, and if we feel as a group we don't need Monday's meeting, we'll cancel it. Okay? Yep. All right. Other than that, then the date of our next meeting is December 8th, 4 o'clock here, is a public hearing for the citizen warrant articles. And also at that time, we will, on the agenda is to revisit the contract agreements that is being worked out with finance. Okay? And I think that's about it. And we'll take it from there. So, oh, I'll take that back. Thanks. If you're looking good. So I'll ask for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
All right. Very good. Everybody have a nice weekend. Enjoy Stroll.
Thank you.
I did, yeah. It's not, it's actually not a year over, it's not a year over year, it's for.
Isn't that for 3 years?
It is.
Oh,
Your moniker.
Did I ask you to specify that? 'Cause I-
you still don't have all of us.